It's February 1st, 2013, and the Melee community just won big. For 6 weeks, fighting game communities had been racing each other in a charity drive to claim the 8th and final game slot at EVO 2013, the biggest fighting game tournament in the world. Whichever community raised the most money for breast cancer research won the slot and got to have their spot on the biggest stage in fighting games. As the sun went down the night before the drive ended, Skullgirls was in the lead and it didn't look particularly close. But the Melee community went to work. Smashboards threads coordinating donations, a 6-hour live stream from community organizers Melee It On Me dedicated to nothing but fundraising, with top players showing up to push it too. When the drive was finally over, Super Smash Bros. Melee had raised $94,683, more than Skullgirls by almost $20K. Across all games, the drive raised over $225,000 for the Breast Cancer Research Foundation. But Melee was in, and one of the crowning moments of this community, and the FGC at large, was now etched in stone. But just 3 days before the tournament was supposed to start, Nintendo of America sent EVO's organizers a letter shutting it all down. What happened next is quite possibly the reason competitive Smash still exists today. This is the story of the tournament that wasn't supposed to happen. Thank you to FlexiSpot, who has paid to be mentioned in today's video. So, transparent YouTuber moment, I guess, but lately I've been getting a lot of, furniture adjacent things sent to me to decorate my place, and it got me thinking about the things I actually enjoy having in my living spaces. I've been partnered with FlexiSpot since 2023, mostly for their desks and chairs, but when I found out they had a more minimalist style, Japanese-inspired bed, I was honestly pretty stoked. The FlexiSpot Kana Retro Japanese Joinery Bed not only looks nice, but is a total breeze to assemble. The frame employs a Japanese joinery style with interlocking wood to securely build the base, meaning you can literally put this together in minutes. Instead of a bag of 50 screws and a weirdly sized Allen key you'll probably never use again, the precision cut joints lock the entire structure together, which means no wobble and almost no creaking. It also just looks pretty nicely made and is pretty fairly priced in my opinion for it being a solid wood frame. So if you're interested, go check out the FlexiSpot Kana Retro Japanese Joinery Bed and you can use my code JPBF at the link in the description for a discount. Thank you again to FlexiSpot for supporting the channel, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. To understand why this whole charity drive even happened, you probably have to understand what being at EVO 2013 actually meant, because Melee had been at EVO before just 6 years earlier. EVO World 2007 was Melee's first appearance at the tournament. At 270 entrants, it was actually the biggest Melee tournament in history up until that point, and it was won by Ken Huang at the height of his title as the King of Smash. This was also the breakout tournament for Mango, who actually beat both Ken and Mewtwo King at this event on his way to a 3rd place finish. But more important than both of them was the player who got 2nd place, which was Hugs86, who is now a real estate agent. And that's awesome. Okay. EVO 2007 felt like the start of something though. This was an incredible era for Melee, a glorious debut to the biggest tournament in fighting games. With a national pro circuit through MLG, a major championship at EVO, and a generation of top players on the come up whose names you probably still know to this day, it really felt like the sky was the limit. But 2007 was the last time anyone would see Melee at EVO until that donation drive in 2013. And the reason for that was this fucking guy, it was Brawl. In 2008, the highly anticipated sequel to Super Smash Bros. Melee came out. EVO replaced Melee with Brawl on the roster, which was a pretty reasonable decision, with the reasoning being roughly what you would expect. The new game was the new game after all, and like most featured titles, EVO wanted to support the most current entry of Smash. But the numbers paled in comparison, badly actually, and the first EVO featuring Brawl was sort of the laughingstock of all things competitive fighting games. It only had 110 entrants, less than half of what Melee had produced the year prior, and it was widely criticized for running with items on, which was something that was just so antithetical to everything EVO and competition stood for. Oh yeah, and a 15-year-old kid who happened to be nearby EVO on a family vacation just won the entire tournament, and he beat Ken, which is just so funny to me. But the showing in fact went so poorly that after giving Brawl one more chance in 2009, EVO just dropped the Smash series altogether. So when the event announced its 2013 lineup in December of 2012, the Smash community paid attention. Tom Cannon, EVO co-founder, put up a Facebook poll asking which game should fill the 8th and final slot, and the Melee community absolutely flooded it. The voting numbers Melee was putting up far exceeded any other games by a margin that made it clear the result really wasn't up for debate. It actually went so heavily in Melee's favor, by the way, that EVO ended up killing the poll, which is insane, and I can't even find it anymore because it's a super old Facebook thread. I don't know, if the editor finds it, then put it here, but yeah, Crazy. So in January 2013, EVO announced that instead of going by votes, the 8th slot would be decided by a charity drive. Whichever community donated the most to that breast cancer research fund got the slot. The official reasoning for this was that the donation format would generate goodwill and money for a worthy cause, both of which were true, but depending on the Smashers you asked from that era, the unofficial read was that EVO didn't necessarily want Smash on the main roster, and they were hoping that we were too broke to donate and the donation requirement would scare the community off. But if that's what they were hoping, it obviously didn't work. The community treated the donation drive like one of their tournaments, and the donation drive's last 24 hours, the Skullgirls comeback push, the Melee on Me Spirit Bomb stream, the final hour donation stacking up, kind of became its own folklore in a community that had been told for half a decade that its game wasn't really worth showing up for. That's the context for what had happened next. Melee winning the donation drive wasn't just a fundraising achievement, it was a community that had been left out of EVO for 5 years, saying, "We're still here and we're gonna prove it with money you probably didn't think we had." But then, just 3 days before the tournament, Nintendo tried to take it all back. On July 9th, 2013, Nintendo of America's legal team contacted EVO's organizers. The first version of the message wasn't just about broadcasting rights. According to EVO's co-founder and the lead negotiator on this matter, Nintendo's initial position was that EVO should not be running the Melee tournament at all. Given the brevity of the issue, EVO pushed back. It was certainly earned from Melee. They had a community that had raised nearly $100,000 for charity just to be at a fighting game tournament. They had hundreds of players already booked to fly to Vegas. After some fierce back and forth, the compromise was this: the tournament could happen, but no one could watch it. If you're wondering whether killing only a broadcast is meaningfully different from killing the entire tournament, the answer is kind of and kind of not. Yeah, the bracket would still happen and the players would still play, which was great for the people who were there, but the event would be completely invisible to everyone else, and a large portion of EVO's mainstream impact came from their Twitch stream. A big reason a fighting game tournament mattered in 2013 wasn't just for the people in the room, it was for the near 100,000 people watching at home. So while it might have felt like a short-term win to keep Melee's success at the charity drive alive, killing the stream meant effectively killing Melee's window to show itself to a much wider audience. At this point, EVO had made a public statement saying they respected Nintendo's intellectual property rights and would comply with the demands of Nintendo's legal department. They didn't fight it publicly, but what they wouldn't fight publicly, the internet would. Within hours of the statement, the story broke on Kotaku, then Polygon, then PA Report, then basically every gaming outlet covering esports at the time. The headline, in summary, Nintendo just blocked the Melee community from streaming the tournament they raised charity money for. Yikes. Oh my god, within hours, this stopped being just a Smash story. #FreeMelee was trending on Twitter. The Reddit thread covering the C&D was the #1 story on the entire site, which is insane. The wider FGC, a community that had its own complicated relationship with Smash being at EVO at all, actually closed ranks. Street Fighter players, Marvel players, KOF players, it didn't really matter who, they all publicly called Nintendo out. The narrative wasn't this weird Nintendo game got blocked from EVO, but instead, a community raised $94,000 for breast cancer research, and the company that owns the game decided that wasn't worth a broadcast. That is a brutal narrative for Nintendo. In a very short period of time, their optics were now the company that took money from the breast cancer charity and gave nothing back. That is the kind of PR nightmare that doesn't just go away in a day. By the next day, on July 10th, Nintendo had already walked it back. After all of this chaos ensued, EVO's co-founder later said something I think is worth lingering on for a sec. He said EVO did absolutely nothing to push for the reversal. They had publicly stated they would comply, they didn't sue, they didn't threaten, they didn't leverage. The walkback happened because the community had made it happen. The pressure came from outside of the negotiation, from terrible press, from the FGC, and from the greater gaming public, and Nintendo decided the cost of standing firm was just higher than the cost of backing down. That's pretty freaking crazy when you think about it. That's insane. A multinational corporation reversed a legal decision about its own intellectual property 3 days before an event because their community made enough noise. Not a single lawyer was involved, no contracts, no behind-the-scenes pressure from EVO, but a group of gamers that thought this was an outrageous decision to make. The same community that had spent 6 weeks raising money to be there in the first place. The same community that, by EVO's own internal politics in 2012, maybe wasn't really wanted on the main stage in the first place. That community forced Nintendo's hand, and it worked. EVO 2013 was back on. At 709 entrants for Melee, EVO 2013 took the crown as the largest Smash tournament of its time, beating the previous record, which was Pound 4 in 2010, by more than double. Day 1 was pools, which is basically an intro day, Day 2 was the rest of bracket down to top 8, and Day 3 was Championship Sunday. Melee's top 8 on the EVO main stage in front of about 6,000 people in the Paris-Las Vegas ballroom, and commentated by Smash legend Prague alongside FGC legend James Chan. What a lineup. And if you thought the theatrics to get Melee here in the first place was a lot, the bracket was about to blow your mind. Wobbles was a top Ice Climbers player out of Texas, known most famously for his namesake technique called wobbling, an infinite combo exclusive to the Ice Climbers. He was considered very good, even ending the 2013 ranking season within the top 10, but was certainly not in the conversation of the Five Gods, a group of players who dominated competitive Melee from 2008 to 2015. So going into EVO, the assumption was the same as every other major. This was a tournament for one of those Five Gods, Mango, Armada, Hungrybox, Mewtwo King, or PPMD, to win. Wobbles started his Sunday by defeating Mango in the winners bracket with Ice Climbers, then he beat PPMD in winners semis, then Hungrybox in winners finals. He ran through 3 out of the 5 gods using a character considered below the standards of a top tier, and had made it all the way to grand finals, with 2007 being the last time an Ice Climbers player had reached that height. It's important to note that due to the nature of EVO's bracketing, every set up until grand finals was a best of 3, meaning a player only needed to win 2 out of 3 games to advance. In Melee, this matters actually a lot. The traditional format for the top cut of bracket, best of 5, prevents players from banning a stage when they win a game, meaning all legal stages are available to both players for the duration of a best of 5 set. In best of 3, the player who wins game 1 or 2 is able to ban a stage they don't want to play on, most obviously their character's worst stage for the matchup, which could provide enormous tempo swings. Perhaps relevant, but in Wobble's last set before Grands, both he and Hungrybox didn't know that this was a best of 3 set, which led to confusion on all fronts. But Wobbles did it. For the first time since 2007, and Ice Climbers had made it to grand finals, and on the biggest stage in fighting games no less. Meanwhile, in the losers bracket, Mango was on a tear of his own. After losing to Wobbles, he ran the gauntlet. SFAT, in a close set he later said he had no business winning, Ice, PPMD, Armada, then Hungrybox in losers finals, including that famous up smash roll read that has become one of the most replayed moments in Melee history. You could just play the clip because, I know you guys want to hear it.
Away from that blast zone! Hungrybox needs a miracle right now. Oh,
he read that roll! Ah! So for Melee's grand return to EVO Grand Finals, it was an unexpected pairing. Mango, one of the 5 gods, versus Wobbles on the best run of his career. Because Wobbles came into Grands from the winner's side, he only needed to win a single best of 5 set out of 2 to take the tournament, while Mango had to win 2 back-to-back best of 5 sets. But the reason they were called gods at the time reared its head here. Mango won the first set 3-0, then the second 3-1. After half a decade of waiting from his 3rd place entry, Mango was officially the EVO 2013 Melee champion. Wobbles had run through 3 of the 5 gods using Ice Climbers and finished 2nd. Mango had run through 5 top players and losers and 1 grand final from the bracket reset. The tournament itself, on just its own merits, was actually one of the best Melee tournaments ever held. And the viewership reflected this too. The same stream Nintendo wanted to shut down had a peak concurrent viewership of well over 100,000. At the time, that was within striking distance of what UMVC3 was pulling at the same event, a game considered the gold standard for fighting game viewership. Melee had not just shown up at EVO, it put up numbers that placed it in the conversation with games that had been on the EVO main stage for years. This one tournament was perhaps the bridge between Smash and the greater FGC. So before I run my little sentimental ending bit, I want to walk through a few things that exist now because of what happened over those 3 days, and let you decide for yourself whether any of them even happened in the first place if Nintendo had held firm on denying Melee entry at EVO. Just a couple months after EVO 2013, Travis Samox Beauchamp released The Smash Brothers, a 9-part documentary series which goes down as one of, if not the most influential pieces of Melee media ever produced. Obviously, the documentary had been in production for years, but its October 2013 release hit a community that had outside attention on it for the first time in a long time. Some of those 100k people who watched EVO Grand Finals on Twitch went looking for context, and the context in that documentary was right there. These were 2 canon events that I believe fed into each other quite well. Also, shoutouts Travis, he's a homie, and we went out for drinks a couple times, he's a cool dude. Major tournaments through the rest of 2013 and into 2014 broke their own attendance records. EVO 2014 actually invited Melee back, and this time with Nintendo's approval. Not necessarily because Nintendo had a change of heart about competitive Smash, no, but because the the optics had changed. Melee was a visible, real thing that drew real numbers, and being the company that publicly fought against that was no longer a tenable position for Nintendo to take. Sponsorship money even started moving, and Smash began to see its first real glimpses into the industry of esports. The career path that the legitimization of competitive Melee took ran through this tournament. Within a few years, esports orgs that had never touched Melee were signing players to real contracts. Mango, EVO 2013's winner, became one of the first Smash players ever sponsored by an esports organization, getting signed to Cloud9 on May 6, 2014. That very possibly doesn't happen if Melee was still being treated as a niche scene Nintendo would rather see disappear. And lastly, Slippy, the rollback netcode that, more than any singular piece of technology, kept Melee alive through the pandemic. That was developed years later by Fizzy. But Slippy's existence depends entirely on the community being big enough and engaged enough to need it. That community was big enough, in my opinion, in part because of what EVO 2013 did to broaden it. But here's the thing I want to be honest about, because if I try to sell this as like a clean win by gamers for gamers, I feel like I'm sort of lying by omission. In 2011, a gameplay modification of Super Smash Bros. Brawl named Project M was developed. It was designed to make gameplay more akin to that of Super Smash Bros. Melee, but with access to Brawl's characters, graphics, and hardware. The game served as an almost perfect bridge between the Melee and Brawl communities, with tournaments featuring professional players from both coming together. It was awesome. Nintendo never sent a public C&D to them, but they made it pretty clear to all event organizers that running PM at major events would be a problem, so by the end of 2015, almost every major had dropped it. Half a decade later, in November 2020, in the middle of a global pandemic and when offline events were literally impossible, tournament series The Big House announced an online tournament using Slippy, which was, at that point, the only possible way to play Melee with other people. Nintendo sent another cease and desist, citing Slippy as a violation of their intellectual property. #FreeMelee trended on Twitter for the second time. The Splatoon community supported the boycott by registering their tournament team names with Melee tributes in them. A Nintendo livestream of a Splatoon 2 event a few weeks later actually got cancelled, partially because nearly a third of the registered teams had names supporting the Smash community. Solidarity across Nintendo's competitive scenes was briefly a thing that existed, which I also find really rad. I even got in the mix too and made a video as an open letter to Nintendo to try to turn the corner on this one. And as a direct result of the Big House cancellation, I became the creative director for 5 Days of Melee, a marathon charity telebroadcast that me and the team put together in under 2 weeks from the Big House news breaking. By the way, I think that's still, like, to this day, one of the coolest things I've ever done, and there's a lot more I could say about 5Dom that goes beyond the scope of this video, so I'll save that story for another day if you want to hear it. But the moral of the story is this. All of these were examples of Nintendo using similar legal tools and techniques to what they had in 2013 against communities that were less than equipped to respond. But the fact that there's a scene at all in 2026 and beyond, the fact that there's anything to fight over, in my mind, that traces back at least partially to a community that proved in July 2013 that it would not back down quietly. EVO 2013 wasn't supposed to happen, but it did anyway. And for my money, I think it has a fair shake to be called the tournament that saved competitive Smash. Thanks for watching. Hey, thanks so much for watching. I'm slowly going through an old backlog of videos and modernizing them a bit to go on the channel now, so let me know if you like these more historical docu-style deep dives and I'll keep them coming. Also, let me know if you were at EVO 2013 because this predates my entry to the scene and I'm always curious as to how this one lives in people's heads. Big thanks to my top tier patrons and YouTube members. I appreciate you all dearly. Check out those links in the description if you feel like supporting the channel and you, more importantly, have the disposable income to do so. But thank you to my top patrons, Avishua Stein, Bobby Wasabi, Brent Mukai, Carter Roberts, Dark Gen X, Eric is Cool, Gamble, Gustavo Cantu Fernandez, James Fabman, Justin Duncan Mills, Kyle Carlin, Marshall Bradley, Michael Talamo, Prakar Sinha, Rosewood, and Sam Wright.